And good day, Merv. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. In fact, shall I say that I am well trained to be here at this time every week?
Very good. Yeah, the discipline is in place, and we've been assessing our timing here for a while too. It's getting to be quite a nice rhythm and habit, and I'm enjoying this Friday discussion. I'm
Well,
looking forward to people joining.
and the other thing about training, because that's our discussion today. So we who are disciplined are now going to be talking about the disciplines of training today.
Yes, indeed, we are.
And I bet you have a vignette or something to start us off.
Well, I do have a nice little story. I was thinking about what I was going to train on and how I was going to discuss how training and an understanding of trainer built into all projects is meaningful. But then I realized it wasn't just the project manager who does and performs the training. I was doing a data center project up in the Pacific Northwest back in 2006, and this company was an old company, and they had very successful processes. And they knew if they were going to spend $10 million in changing corporate, they were going to have to get ahead of this. And they had actually formal documented procedures for how do we change the culture. And the CIO and the primary project manager of this, who was the general contractor as well for the building, had done this 4 or 5 times together. And 9 months before the formal planning started, they actually started communicating to everybody, all the people who were going to have their data and their applications moved to this central area. And they created a set of frequently asked questions. They had a bunch of lunch and learns, and they dropped into meetings in every organization. So by the time the data center was starting to become real, everybody was ready for it. And it was like a foregone conclusion. It was beautifully mastered. And that's when I realized if you're doing training well, number one, it's just a natural part of your work. And number two, it's necessary, especially when you're adding a project that has so much function that it's going to disrupt the environment.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, uh, putting people in place to do their work without adequate preparation is always a recipe for disaster. Always.
Oh yeah, yeah. And we don't understand disaster. It's this weird word out there. But when you say disruption, you're saying everybody's gonna not be able to do work for a week. You can put a hard number around that. And that's when people are willing to put up money into your project and invest in that training.
Well, not to derail us too much, because I know we've got some process and ideas to talk about. But one of the thoughts I had was because of a project that recently been associated with. If we take an agile release train approach and produce functionality every so often and lay it out to the field, we are literally training the entire field organization of several thousand people every time there's a new release. So we really have to think about that expense, pulling them out of the field into the training ground, putting them back in. We really have to think through that expense in terms of what it really means for that size of a population that needs to be trained. So I think that kind of, the agile approach, the whatever approach, training is not to be taken lightly.
Yes, yes, it's necessary, and everything that went goes around with training, the action of upskilling, the assessment of needs, the validation that training is good, creating that environment that makes it easy to acquire new skills. Yeah, we're not just talking about classroom experience here.
Right. Oh, exactly. But let's take this maybe from a project management point of view. Should we take it maybe first begin with a team approach, like the whole idea of getting our team prepared, working with our team, things that you and I personally enjoy about being mentors and coaches to our teams. Let's say our internal IT development teams.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about that. What really excites you about that?
For me, I think it's that aha moment. When you're trying to get a concept across, when someone comes to you, well, even if they don't come to you for assistance, you still need to have them all equipped to carry on with the project. So to actually put instruction out there in a way, either it's formal or it's informal or it's around the coffee, whatever it happens to be, to get it out there, and then suddenly you realize that they get it. And it's that aha moment that says, finally, and it's got nothing to do with how good an instructor or teacher or mentor I am. It's got to be with the fact that I was able to impart that knowledge, they got it, and they could carry on and also trade that knowledge with other people as well.
Yeah, there's a certain joy we have in acquiring knowledge. It really is. There's intense physiological satisfaction,
Yeah.
and it almost is as strong when we see that same, comprehension in anybody else's eyes. It's like, parent watching their kids opening a Christmas present. That's one of the reasons why I took on the career in my second part of my life. I did. It's every day I walk into class. It's Christmas.
Well, I remember one very specific recent project pre-COVID. So I actually had an office. I was actually on site with my client. And we get these concepts across. We kind of get, and I think the concept in the situation was requirements gathering. How do I get my client team understanding what it means to work with the IT vendor in such a way that they're very much participants in the requirements gathering process? Getting that concept across and then having them come to my office just at odd times, putting their feet up on my desk and just saying, "Hey, how about we do something like this?" Or how about, just that whole interaction of, "I get this. Now let's see if we could do something even sort of more elaborate." I mean, it's just a great way of kind of ending a day knowing that what you've imparted to your client or to your staff has come across well.
Yep. Yep. Yes, indeed. That's really important too. It's that self-satisfaction. And
Yeah.
without that, we don't have, just like our workers, we don't have a reason to come to work. Um, Here's the question. You have some big projects that you work on, and all your projects are pretty much big now. Um, what's it like preparing for your teams and helping your teams? What efforts do you need to go into in planning and preparing for people for training and all that on something that huge?
Well, let me first of all, from my perspective, look at the nuanced aspects that I think came to me because of experience, maybe some bad experiences. The nuanced aspects are to kind of look way ahead in the schedule and see what is coming up and begin that mentoring, that coaching, the formal training, whatever it takes to get your team ready for something that's coming way into the future. So, as an example, I may use is again using that client team aspect that I had just talked about a little while ago. So I'm preparing my client team. Now, these are people who pulled off the rank and file out of the field. They were people who were working with their own customers. They knew nothing about IT except they currently had a green screen in front of them. And so pulling them in and saying, okay, now I'm going to teach you how to work with a vendor who is going to be asking you all kinds of questions about how you do your job and how it would be done better because they're going to build a new system for you. So the idea of anticipating those needs way ahead of time. And by the way, I went to the CEO of the corporation and said, I need your brightest and best. I don't want, if your managers give me somebody voluntarily, I don't want that person. I want the person who, when I go, and we used to joke about this internally, when I go and ask for that person to come onto my team from your line, and if I see tears in your eyes, then I know I have the right person. So I think part of that, so let me pause here and get some of your ideas, but part of that is anticipating, looking way ahead, and giving yourself enough time to build that instruction and that mentoring into the schedule.
Yes, yes. There are formal and informal aspects. It's understanding, it's the assessment, the understanding the needs, whether it's skills or knowledge. It's being able to forecast, when you're going to need it, so you can have the training close enough to the work, yet not impacting the work, and then giving them an opportunity either before the formal work is in place or something else for them to practice their skills. And so when they work from I'm learning, I'm training, I'm doing, it's a smooth transition. And the doing part can be teachable moments where you can actually look and provide the finesse of the components. And you're right, when I'm thinking about this and doing it well and planning it out, and I practice and rehearse in my head, all of a sudden this starts looking really, really natural.
It does. And if I can just take that previous example and kind of elaborate on it, there's some other aspects of it too. I knew that our IT vendor, for example, had proposed a particular tool for their requirements gathering, and it was based largely on use of decision tables. Now take someone off a line and say, we're going to use decision tables to help the client, to help the vendor understand your requirements. I mean, that would blow their minds. But bringing them in, again, the brightest and best, working with them through some various examples of decision tables, within a month or so of the vendor coming on board, they were picking apart decision tables with the vendor is just as easily as the vendor's analysts.
And
So
yeah, yeah, you're actually allowing the human nature of curiosity to do the work you need, and yet you're allowing them to use their terminology and
yeah.
their knowledge and experience. It's a very, again, that's a very customer or a stakeholder focused approach to this, and that's brilliant.
And you asked, how to prepare. The other thing was that we as a leadership team did not do was we never assumed they could not do it because it wasn't part of their experience. If you can assume they can do it, they can do it.
Yeah, it is rather amazing.
Yeah.
We tend to put these, fences around, quote unquote skills, and we realize that we're pretty clever people, and we can call these things like complex systems theory, and we can call it truth tables, we can call it linear regression, but we do this naturally every day, and people just do it, and understanding how it looks like from their standpoint and putting it in their job and their context, it's natural. We don't have to call it what the software engineers call it.
Right.
It's all right.
And we can give them permit. And I tell you what, once this group understood that they could stand toe to toe, shoulder to shoulder with these very smart people that were coming in to build a new system, it was like you could not hold them back.
This is the neat thing, and I've often thought about this. We have a team charter. It says, this is the person assigned to this role and responsibility. Here's the person assigned to this role and responsibility. Wouldn't it be neat if we formally did the same thing? And it sounds like you're doing this in your training. Wouldn't it be neat if we said, here's the person who's engineering the solution, and that's their domain, and that's where they own the responsibility. And here's the process. And that's what you're the primary aspect of. And we have to have your participation and input in here because
Exactly.
it's your process. It's not the engineer's process.
It's your business domain. You have the knowledge of that. It's up to you to make sure that the engineer understands your business and watch for those telltale signs where they think they understand but don't really. That often happens, right?
Yeah. And that's what setting aside time for formal training in these major projects is. Now, again, we're talking about major projects and being able to look, 1, 2 to 6 months in advance. But, we can also do this to a great extent in all of our project work, with a little help from our team and our experts. We can look down the road a while and say, okay, what do we need? What does our team need? And it's not just coming from us, the stakeholders, just the team, just like you said, when the team realizes they can say to the project manager, I'm going to need this. All of a sudden, they have an understanding and a sense of freedom to actually ask for what they know they need.
Exactly. And an incentive. And by the way, you just mentioned stakeholders. I think I would ask the same question of you as you did of me, but I would turn it around to say, how do we train our stakeholders to be maximum performers and providers of information to our team and actually decision makers on our project and on our team?
Wow. It's almost a mirror of a kickoff. It doesn't have to be so formal, but it's some type of communication of the value of the project and the value of their contributions and the necessity for them to interact and then talking about the value of what they're contributing to, right? People don't necessarily work for functionality. Boy, you're going to help build a great email server. No, you're going to actually make it easier in the meetings. You guys have been talking about you want a way to automatically filter your emails and conversations broken up by your work. Now you get to participate in fixing this problem that you've been grumbling about.
Exactly. One of the tactics that I use is I earn their confidence. And I do that in a number of ways. I offer counsel in certain situations, but here's the more important thing. I earn their confidence by taking their counsel. So I may offer some say sort of an approach to doing something, and a stakeholder will come back and says, well, that's not a bad idea, except you have to understand our culture or our restrictions or constraints because of legislation or something. And as a result, let's look at a different way of doing what you suggested. So again, taking that counsel back and say, oh, okay, let me go back and change my approach and come back to you. So by doing that interaction, first of all, giving them counsel, secondly, accepting counsel. And as my grandfather used to say, listen twice as much as you talk.
Huh?
And once you earn that confidence, then you earn the right to work with them to help them understand where they are most needful on the project.
Yeah, think about it from a humanistic standpoint. It's like this is their organization, it's their business, it's their work. It's almost like it's their culture. And when we visit other cultures and other nations, what do? We don't say, that's not the type of dinner I have. This is my dinner.
Right.
That's not what's going to give you the best restaurant in town. You're going to actually figure out what they're eating, what they like to eat, and what their preference is. It's a series of questions. It's adopting the mindset of the culture that you're intruding on.
Well, and it's something as simple as listening for clues like, well, I came from this jurisdiction and they did it this way. And the person tells you, well, yeah, but we have a union here that that jurisdiction didn't have. Well, that doesn't matter. This jurisdiction did it this way and it was successful. But we have union rules. You have to kind of work within, and the union may elicit a different culture than the one you came from. If you work within that to make it successful.
Right, and the people who work in, day out are the experts in that, and you cannot assume that you know more than them. You know the engineering of solutions, and you know how to lead stakeholders and teams
Yeah,
into fixing problems, but you don't know the specific details
that's
that,
right.
and And only when we invest in that type of a relationship can we actually assume that we're going to be able to get the information we need. And oftentimes it's over a cup of coffee or over dinner or dessert. It's not in a meeting or a conference room. That's what fascinates me.
Yeah.
The relationships we build are not because we have debates and we agree in a meeting. It's because we sit down and get to know each other, and we create that, like I said, a humanistic understanding of the individual and the group that we're interacting with.
I'm smiling as you said that because you just reminded me. I had a situation where I'd worked in a very large project, and I'd been there for some time. And this was years later after the project was complete. I was on to another project. Probably 5 or 6 years later, I was actually sitting in a hot tub watching the Winter Olympics. Now I'm
Uh,
Canadian. Now, as a Canadian, that was the year that the men's hockey, the women's hockey, the men's curling, and the women's curling took the gold medals. And so, as I'm in the hot tub watching this happen, I get an email from the CIO that I hadn't talked to in years saying, "Hey, you want to do a friendly wager on on the results of the Olympics?" I think it was US and Canada playing or something. And so I'm sitting there going, of course I do. Well, ended up winning, but I mean, it doesn't matter the circumstance, but the relationships to say that I can take this particular relationship out of the work and years later do a friendly wager over a silly hockey game. I mean, doesn't that say something in terms of the ability to kind of collaborate and make something work on a project?
Yeah, and see, whether it's with the CIO or an admin or a janitor or a team member, whoever, it's having these normal everyday conversations that, number one, create that trust. Number two, it allows us to have a more authentic and a more natural interaction when we start talking about the business of the work we're doing together too. And we can be more frank and more open. Relationships are relationships. They don't stop at the borders of the project.
No, that's exactly. And people have to remember that. It's like, I'll be nice to this person for the next 2 years. And then after that, they're out of my life. No, you don't have to be that way. You can create these relationships that don't have to be project based. That's, but let me offer something else. You asked me about working on large projects where investment of time and money is a foregone conclusion. And how do we build teams, or how do we work with our teams or prepare our teams and stakeholders now? But let me offer this too. Every once in a while, you're going to come across with someone who's not mentorable, who is not teachable, who is not able to kind of go along, and yet they've been seconded to your project. What do you do in that situation?
First of all, my technical experience says we need to do a risk assessment. But honestly, we understand their strengths and weaknesses. You still do an assessment and you notice where they are strongest, and you can work from the human behavior standpoint. They still have emotions, they still have needs, and they still are influenced by motivation. And so, from a behavioral standpoint, I don't see a lot. But what I do is I have to have alternatives in case that the behaviors are not trainable. That's the best way I can put it. For instance, like I said, the janitor. The janitor needs to clean behind the servers in the lab every day, right? And before the project started, there was discussion that this janitor had kicked out the cables of a server. Okay, I have a risk assessment and I've identified a risk. Now, he may not be trainable, but that's all right. How can I have other alternatives? What other changes can I make to the project in order to ensure the project is not negatively influenced by that individual?
Well, and I like that answer because what you're doing is, first of all, you're taking care of the needs of the project. But secondly, you're also protecting the dignity of that person. And it may be that that person's removed, but with dignity intact. So, in many ways, you're salvage or trying to salvage that person's contribution. But if you can't, you still want that person to succeed somewhere else, even if it's not on your project. So, I like that.
It's maintaining that self-respect. If you have to replace somebody, it is it's a long, long runway that you're flying on, okay?
Yeah.
And you don't do it by yourself. You're validating their performance and behavior. You're assessing any previous behavior that may have been similar, and you ask for any ideas or any previous solutions that their direct manager or their organization has come up with. Because if this is a behavior that doesn't work on your project, there's a good chance that this is a behavior that has impacted the organization before,
Right.
and you can get some ideas on, at least get a little history on this behavior. And again, we're not changing people. People are people. We're looking at behaviors that influence it, and people can change behaviors. And anyway, we can't even change people's behaviors.
Right.
People have to change their own. So when you come from an attribute standpoint, I really feel that there is an opportunity for you to teach and mentor and train through attributes. But for the most part, it's like you're the door opener and it's their decision to walk through.
And there's another aha moment. If you can turn that individual, that's another aha moment that,
Oh,
you can go back at home and in your closet, pat yourself in the back. But at the same time, you've just salvaged something, first of all, for the project. And then secondly, for that individual and that individual's dignity.
yeah. And talk about, training for the value of the individual. Um, when you raise people up, when you teach people and train people, even if they're your direct reports or your workers, they don't push you out. I'll train until I die. I'll train everybody around me because I know people don't push you out. They push you up. I've seen
Yeah.
this magic in my career, and I've seen this magic in enough of my peers' career that I can say, this is pretty true.
So I'm going to just take this topic a little on a little different path, Tim, and that is as a project manager, and those project managers listening to me are guilty of this as well. But as a project manager, when I build my schedule, I often don't put in time for training, or I don't put enough time in for training. So how do we establish the time that's needed? Because time is needed for training on, in terms of our members, our stakeholders, our teams, whatever. How do we establish that time?
Let me actually give you an interesting model that I've thought about from time to time. Let's take it instead of just training. Let's take it from quality. How do you build in quality activities into a schedule? It doesn't produce anything and it takes more time, right? You measure twice, you
Yep.
cut once,
Right.
but there's some intrinsic value in quality. It's called correctness, whether it's accuracy or precision. It makes sure that we don't waste, we don't have defects, and we don't have to go back and apologize for things. Right? It makes things better. Now, you can quantifiably demonstrate that if I'm investing in quality here, the payback is fewer defects and fewer waste and rework over here. And you can show a balanced scorecard very easily on that. And you can demonstrate that too to a great extent for training, because what is training? Training is number one, either doing work more correctly. Well, that's the outcome. That's the preferred outcome. Or it's part of continuous improvement. And nobody can deny continuous improvement has no value. And we can measure and we can validate. the effectiveness of training pretty easy.
Well, yeah, I wrote a blog post a few years ago, and I can't remember what I called it, but it was based on the old time. If people are old enough to remember this, there used to be a commercial on TV for the Fram oil filter people,
Mhm.
and the tagline was "Pay me now or pay me later."
Yes.
And I've heard that tagline since then many times, and people don't associate it anymore with Fram oil filter. They just here, pay me now or pay me later. And I think that's where it comes down to. I can I can take the expense up front and train formally or train through a mentorship program or something. I can put the effort in up front and save the pain on the back end, which may be several times greater. Because as you were saying, if I missed my quality up here, I'm doing correction back here that I shouldn't have had to do. So it's pay me now or pay me much more later.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and training should not be thought of as an add-on. It's not
Right.
an add-on. It's a cost of doing business, and it's maintenance costs. Instead of maintaining machines, you're maintaining the keep capability of your workforce. And whether it's through motivation or influence because of attributes and character improvement, or it's through the sheer mechanical capabilities that are being improved through your skills and knowledge, training is going to improve. And it's just like, you don't rush people. You give people time. You give people time to learn. It sounds trite, but every project should actually consider training reserve.
They should. In fact, when I worked for a company in corporate America, we had a policy whereby, for example, if people wanted to get their PMI certification, their PMP, we would not only pay for that, we would provide the training as a corporation. And the catch was, if you give us a Saturday, we'll give you a Friday. So we may train them over a couple of weekends where we literally would lose that billable Friday, but they would invest in their own careers also by giving us a Saturday. So we would, there'd be an exchange. Yeah, where the project lost some billable time, but that's okay because the rewards on the other end, having a trained project leader, project manager, team lead, whatever it was that we ended up training them for, was far superior to not having that training in the first place. It's just an approach. I know some corporations may not want to take away a Saturday or Sunday. We didn't want to either, but it worked. Our employees liked it because it got them the certification that they needed.
See, that's the beautiful thing. And we cannot dismiss certifications, even though that certification may be attained outside of the project.
Right.
There's so much value in public recognition that you're acquiring some knowledge or skill. That's a sense of self-respect. And that's also a sense of respect from others. And those are powerful motivators. This is what grows not just a healthy team, but a well self-organizing team who actually supports each other.
So if I look at that team, the self-organizing team, the team that I may be responsible for, what do I look for in team members or in the team itself to see what types of training or their needs, the training needs that they may have? Is it kind of a generic thing, or do I look for very specific ideas or indicators?
Boy, we almost have to dissect this stuff at a macro to micro level, because you can do an assessment, and you can actually do a survey of the stakeholders and teams, and do an assessment of work, and do a variance analysis, of course. But when the work's ongoing too, you can look for any variances. And it's not just variance in work performance. It's lack of confidence, or it's too much confidence. When we have somebody who's low capability and high confidence, basically low experience, and they're overly confident. This can cause problems too, and take it doesn't take for them to make a mistake for us to look at this. We can actually look at their general behavior through their work and their progress, as well as their approach to problem solving and analyzing. How about you?
I all of what you just said, but I also look for aptitude. Aptitude and interest. And I go back to then my example of when I went to the CEO and I said, I'm going to recruit your brightest and your best. That meant, of course, they would have to offer me for the interview process their brightest and best. And I remember several times, but one really stands out to me was a young woman who was absolutely IT illiterate. And yet we wanted people on our project representing business. But there was something in the way she answered our questions and responded, leaned forward when she responded, showed incredible interest that I said, I'm going to take a chance on this person. And we brought her in. And I tell you what, I have never been so impressed with someone who caught on. And I remember very specifically, we're doing some formal training on how to do user acceptance testing. When I say it's, in terms of using the software and how to write a defect and how to prove the defect was real and, all of the steps that you do when you're writing up defects. I remember her getting out of her chair, coming to the front of the room, sitting on the floor and just being attentive with her notebook and writing this down and asking questions. And man, did we ever get a winner from that perspective. But it was her aptitude and her interest that caught my eye.
Yeah, it's that level of emotional engagement that you see, and active listening is a really great indicator. It means that they are, foregoing everything else for the time being, and this is the center of their universe. Now, this is what's really strange. We see this in people who are really strong in the capabilities, even if they don't know those capabilities yet,
Yeah.
which is really strange.
Yeah.
Strengths are things that we're willing to set aside extra time for and do it, even if we're not paid.
Yeah.
Um, there we have conversations over breakfast and dinner, and we think about this stuff and we write about it stuff, even when we're off the clock. That's how people become strong. And you don't have to be, knowledgeable to be strong in something. It's it's that engagement and curiosity. It's the human component that actually is a great indicator of this is a teachable moment. This is a trainable window of opportunity.
You just reminded me of another example. Again, in this situation, I was basically training my client peer so that when I left the project, she could do what I was doing in many ways. And, it was, I don't know if it was a lack of self confidence or whatever, but I said one time I came over to her office. I said, we're going for a walk. And we left the building, just the two of us. We got on the sidewalk. I stopped. I turned to her and I said, you don't know how good you are. And the look on her face was one of like puzzlement and then wonder. And when I said it again, I said, you don't know how good you are. And then we went back in. And within weeks, her confidence had risen. Her ability to address the group and her superiors had risen. Her, her, her responsibility in the project grew. And the vendor team actually then would go to her for every kinds of situation. Because just from those few words, there was nothing magical about what I said. It's just something that I saw that no one else had pointed out to her.
I've noticed that with people. And it's not like you're validating that they're smart, because oftentimes they know in their heads, even though it's not true, they know in their heads they're not smart. Okay.
Yeah.
You're giving them permission to behave smart.
Yeah.
You're not acknowledging or recognizing or validating. You're just giving permission. You're opening the door and say, "Yep, you are allowed to think you're smart here." Now, again, it means that you get to do your homework and you have these indicators in the back of your mind that you say, "Yeah, this is the qualities of people who step into this role all the time." But a lot of times when we're validating people or we're helping people understand, it's not like you pass the finish line. It's you're allowed to measure yourself and measure your performance.
But isn't this surprising? And I give you these stories not to say how good I am as a mentor, because I'm no different than anybody else. I do these stories because I think it's our responsibility as project leads, as perhaps senior people on our project, to look for the good in people and to let them know of their contribution. So often we just go on, it's like, well, that's expected of you. So why should I pat you on the back? Right. But it's up to us to just say, I see your need or I see your contribution and I value it. And then let's go from here. So it's just something we need to do as project lead.
Yeah, it's called recognition.
Yeah.
It's not a reward. A reward is here's a cookie, you passed the finish line. Yeah. You made an achievement. I recognize I see you and your attitude and behavior, and it doesn't go unnoticed.
And in the context of what we're talking about today, training, those few words that I told that young woman were as good as any class on organizational behavior she might have taken for 8 hours.
Exactly. Exactly. Now here's a good question for you. Um, we train people, right? We do on the job training. We bring teams into a conference room. We hold experts. We bring experts on site, or we work together and build a really good syllabus. What do you use to validate training is effective?
Well, a couple of things is I look for the end result. And I don't mean if I train someone to do a particular job, I don't mean 6 months later, how did you do? I mean, I do intermittent reviews of did that training do exactly what it was supposed to have done for these people or this person in the sort of the ongoing aspects of their work. And again, I don't wait 6 months later to see, oh wow, it worked, or oh wow, it didn't. I may do like 2 week intervals. I may do assessments with that person. I may have conversations with people around them, their peers or even their subordinates. But I want to understand firsthand, did that training take almost immediate effect?
Yeah, and you have a bunch of things that we could discuss here. Number one, um, training does happen, by memorizing things.
Yeah.
That's recognition. What you're looking for and what you're validating for is the comprehension and the ability to apply that knowledge. That's the gold that we're mining for. And we're adding this extra work on the project. The second part is, we have two indicators that we really need to look at. Number one is the individual showing increase in performance, right? Whether it's a test, pre-test, post-test, or whether it's the work itself. Is there increase in capability? And it shows the training worked, and it also shows this training and this approach to training is effective. And so we have an opportunity to improve the individual through further training and interaction. We have an opportunity to improve the training itself as well.
Well, and the example I used much earlier, where I brought staff in from the client organization to work alongside IT, I was able to work with them before the IT vendor came on board. And I was able to explain to them that, first of all, they were going to be dealing with young men and women who were absolutely brilliant, top of their class, exceptional in what they were about to do, but they were not wise to the world. They were very young. They had not yet learned a lot of business acumen and that sort of thing. So not to be intimidated by them because of their aggressiveness and their intelligence and that sort of thing, but to truly understand what it means to work alongside and collaborate and to catch them in those nuances that say, no, no, that's not going to work for us. So to be able to stand up for themselves. And then it was one thing to train them, and I'll use that in quotations, train them, because I had to kind of set those expectations. But then I would sit in on the requirements elicitation sessions. I would sit in on what was happening, and I would see if my previous training or mentorship had actually rubbed off and they were standing up for what they needed to do from a business point of view. If they weren't, we just had a conversation afterwards, and we got them to the point where, yes, I was able to assess on an interim basis going forward that in fact that the training had rubbed off and they were truly applying it in on the job. So it's just a matter of continuous monitoring after the fact.
Yeah, training does not stop at the end of the class.
Oh, but how many people think it does?
I know, I agree with you. It's like we pass the finish line, we don't have to run anymore. Guess what? It starts all over another race tomorrow and
Yeah.
another race and another race. What do you like to teach?
Oh man. I think I've told you this before, and I'm gonna kind of come into this from left field. But I went up the project management ranks, the kind of the more soft analysis ranks than the hardcore technical ranks, because I found out I could always hire someone who was smarter than me for half my price to do the technical stuff. So that's kind of the left field coming in. So what did that mean? That means I had to personally learn things like communication techniques. And I mentioned requirements definition before. There's a technique to requirements definition that's not technically oriented. So those kinds of things, because I had to learn them, I love to teach them.
Okay.
How about
Okay.
yourself?
Um, a lot very similar. It's it's not it's not, how to plan or how to do a schedule or, it's not how to build a server. Um, it's general topics like data analysis. When somebody sees earn value and you say earn value and they hear rough,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, do you know what you can do with this? And over a series of conversations and playing with it, they realize that they're doing earn value when they drive to work and drive home. And they do earn value when they when they're just doing common estimating for their day's activities. And it gains them such power and control. And I've thought about this long and hard, and some days I think I teach this data analysis and things like earned value too much. But on the other hand, I know I enjoy it so much that I'm good. And people trigger and people learn from me, not necessarily because I'm the best teacher in this area, but because I'm convinced that this stuff is. And having a teacher or leader with conviction is almost more valuable than actually demonstrating the value of the material.
No, that's exactly right. And you were talking about the earned value it's kind of become part of you. And it's the same thing with, and I use the term, or I use the example of requirement solicitation or requirements definition. It's amazing how I can walk into a room and watch what's going on as the IT analyst attempts to elicit requirements, come up with the acceptance criteria, come up with the user stories, whatever it is. And then I'll sit there and I'll watch the business users and these people that I've coached, and I'll watch them ask questions of the IT person. And sometimes I'll ask questions of the IT person, because here's what's very good about IT people. They can give you the letter of the requirement, but not the spirit of the requirement, because quite often, but quite frankly, they are not business oriented. They're not from that domain. So it's interesting to me how we can kind of tease out the nuance of a requirements just by learning to read the room. And an IT person who's giving you policy as a rule that they're going to put into a requirement, without understanding what that policy does, you can easily help that person understand much more just by asking some questions. And they always give you a tell that they don't really understand it, but they think they do.
Right. One of the tells is they're using too many words to describe something.
Bingo.
Yeah, exactly. They're overly technically descriptive on a very logical process. It's funny because this is somebody who's memorized the steps, yet they have not performed the steps enough time for it to become muscle memory.
Right. I always, and I teach the business staff that come on. I teach them. So, what do you find? Let's go to our. Let's think about being in a restaurant. What do you feel is best about your server? Is it the one who merely takes the order, or is it the one who helps you understand the menu items and your dietary needs and all of the kinds of stuff that goes along with your order? And they'll go, yeah, I want the other person. I said, well, that's who we need to train these IT people to be, because they're very good at order taking. They're just not very good at understanding how that order needs to be put into your business so that your business works when they deliver the product to you.
Exactly. Exactly. I, I think a lot of times if I lived in either a perfect vacuum or a perfect world, would be able to have in every project, have the technical designers and implementers and have the business participants and owners go through their learning and training
Yeah.
and then put them together in a collaborative environment to actually start interacting with each other so they can actually start practicing this understanding. If I was looking at it from a non-project or an organizational approach, this would be like only common sense to do.
But this is when you ask the question, what do I like doing? This is what really gets me. I mean, yeah, you mentioned before, I can teach Gantt charts. I can teach how to do WBSs. That is not, you know what? I'm going to go get my project management book for dummies and give it to you. Now I'm going to teach you what I want to teach you, which is the fun stuff, which is really
Right.
fun. Yeah.
The history, the why, the
Yeah.
the the nuances.
Yeah.
This is and you know what? That's what people learn. They learn from the stuff that elicits their curiosity. They
Right.
don't learn from the stuff that, is just a repetition of any book they can pull off a shelf.
I think I just probably some of my best experiences are taking my team out, and this is working, let's say, for a public assistance organization, taking my team out to a field office and having them observe the counter interactions between the person who is serving the person who needs assistance and watching that. And then saying, okay, think about how you're now going to design the system so that that interaction is done with consistency, accuracy, and preserves the dignity of all the parties. Think about that. Don't think about just the technical aspects of your job of designing. Think about who you're serving. And it's amazing the difference once they see what they're going to do versus how they're going to be doing it when they get back on the project.
Yeah, and it's time consuming and it's complicated and you have to get permission and authorizations and everything, right? But the value and the return on that investment is so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing, and I tease my teams often this way. The worst words that you ever want to hear from your client are, I know that's what I asked for, but that's not what I wanted. And it's up to you, my IT team member, to understand what they want when they ask you for this.
That's right. That's right. So these are the fun things you like to teach.
Oh, yeah.
What do you not like to teach? What's hard for you to teach yet you wish everybody understood?
Well, you know what's hard to teach, and I think you mentioned it earlier. Did you say attributes?
Mhm.
Things like, well, I think you can teach, for example, emotional intelligence. I think that comes with time and maturity. But there's things that are so difficult to teach that you just wish you could just God had given it to them at birth, but he didn't. And it's this one of them is discernment. If there's just the ability to walk into a room and say, "Oh, I shouldn't say anything at this moment," or just understanding people and being discerning about how much to say, when to shut your mouth, when to open your mouth, how much to say, what to say. It just, to me, that's the most difficult aspect of our job as IT people on a client site.
You know what's funny is you hit on a really big trigger of me too. Philosophers have talked about that for millennia. How do I actually slow down my emotional responses and engage my intellect? We've learned in the last 25 years that there are physiological reasons why this occurs. And we have to train ourselves to actually engage our cerebral cortex before we respond to our emotions. And it takes years of practice, and it's not something that you can learn in a classroom.
Yeah. And I always say, I always admire, especially younger people, because I was stupid when I was in my 20s. I said things that I just even today remember and regret.
Yeah.
I'll so admire people who have learned that early on in their careers, in terms of that discernment aspect. So,
Yeah, yeah, I'm amazed at so many people coming through my classes that are just the same way, who are able to not just control their tempers and their tongues, but able to have a logical discussion in a productive manner in a way that leads to a better understanding. And it's just the nature of how they have approached learning. Learning how to learn is difficult if you haven't learned it by the time you've gone through university.
yeah, or through some sort of skilled life. I was fortunate. I had parents and grandparents that despite my stupidity, were still able to at least get something across that did finally stick over the years.
Yeah, good teachers and good family, they're always patient.
So, this has been
Okay,
another.
we're wrapping up here. Is there anything else that you want to provide as sage advice on embracing training as a proper component and a constant component in projects for our new project manager?
Yeah, I don't know that it's new from what we talked about, but I want to summarize something we talked about that maybe didn't come across as clearly as I wanted to. And that is, as project managers, we believe in training. Typically, we set aside all the training dollars for the technical training, your Microsoft certification, your AWS certification, that sort of thing. And so often we forget about the things that really count. Like maybe we should invest in some of our young people or some of our even mid career people in how to write a proper email.
Oh, yeah, formal written communications.
Yeah. How to, number one, how to remember who your audience is and write or speak to that audience. There's things that we can train people on that should not be always technical. We need to save some of those project training dollars for the soft skills as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't take money all the time. Sometimes it's just, 15 minutes a day, 15 minutes a week,
Yeah.
and just have a reminder, a milestone on your schedule. It says, is there anyone who could benefit from going through developing of the proposal or developing of the presentation? That's all it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been fun. This has
Yes,
been
it has been.
excellent. And I know we've got some great topics again for next week and future weeks.
So once again, thank you. It's always a pleasure and looking forward to talking to you again next week, Merv.
All right. Thanks. And we'll see you next week.
Indeed.